Welcome to Politicking as usual, your favorite once a week morning show where we talk about last week, this week. Because what's our favorite nation on the planet? That's right, procrastination. And joining me for a special contribution to let us know what's going in the world, he's the creator of the Cameron Journal podcast and a political mastermind. He's the one and only Cameron Coates. Cam, how are you doing today, brother? And welcome back. Well, I guess it's the
Thank
first
you.
time since we relaunched to politicking as usual. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. I am very excited to talk about some of the fascinating stuff that is going on. Pardon one moment. My lips are dry, which is unusual for the Pacific Northwest, but yes, there's a lot going on in the world right now. So where where do you want to start?
You are the mastermind, so I'm going to let you pick off where we're really going to just let you take over this segment because I know you have some goodies for us. But before we get into it, before we
Yeah.
dig into what's going on, please let the audience know a little bit about your background and also a little bit about your podcast, The Cameron Journals.
Yes, so for those that are new and unfamiliar, my name is Cameron Lee Cowan. I'm the author of three books, a short story collection, a novel, and my nonfiction book, What the Hell is Going On? A Primer to Our World in the Age of Trump, which is a collection of all of my really big essays that I wrote over about a 5-year period. Um, I'm telling everyone I am going to have a new version of that book out this year. It is almost done. I had COVID for 3 weeks that kind of pushed everything back. Um, and and also my car got broken into twice. So I've been busy with life and not had a chance to finish the book yet, but it will be done this year. And it includes brand new essays and new stuff for a post-COVID environment. And then also I'm obviously right at the Cameron Journal, as you mentioned. I also do a podcast called the Cameron Journal Podcast. Every Monday we have the weekly news hour, where I talk about the week's headlines and some of the top news stories that I'm tracking and following. And I also kind of go over just things that are going on around the Cameron Journal. And then we also have an interview every week, usually with an author about their book, which can be anything. I mean, we just had an episode about a woman and her infertility journey. We have philosophy, all sorts of things. So come for the news, come for the interesting people. It's a lot of fun. And you can find me almost anywhere. The podcast is on every service you can think of, including Amazon now. That's a new one we added. And it's also on YouTube for those that are more visually inclined. And then if you want to keep up on the latest, just follow me anywhere on social media. Just search for my name. I'm the only brown person with this name, so search for Cameron Cowan and the brown face, and that's me. And yeah, so that's kind of what I do. I have 2 degrees in political science. I've worked on campaigns. I've ran a couple campaigns. I have the weird distinction of being both part of the Tea Party movement and the Occupy movement, kind of back to back as part of my own political transformation from growing up Republican and evangelical to being a liberal, overeducated coastal elite. And so yeah, so that's kind of about me and what I do and what I bring to the table. I've been doing the news in some form since 2010. So, yeah, so I've been writing since I was 17 years old in 2005. And um, this is this I read 150 news sites a day, so you don't have to.
Who better? So who better? So guys, please check it out. I've checked out the podcast many a time. I'm a huge fan. That's why he's here, but he's also a master of what he does. So guys, please check out the Cameron Journal. Check out the books. I'm gonna send you that cash app. I want an autographed copy when the new book comes out. So we're gonna make sure we get that sent over to you. Maybe we'll do a book report on it or something. I don't know. I'm feeling
Yeah, no, we
crazy.
have 2 great books coming out this year, a new version of What the Hell is Going On, and I'm also finishing my book called America's Lost Generation, the economic story of millennials.
Perfect.
So, yeah, which even gets into sex and dating stuff and all this type of thing, and so telling a different side of that story. So, yeah, there's a lot of great stuff coming up.
I'm here for it. And as a millennial, I am living it, so I understand. So let's get it into it without further ado. And it's a perfect segue. What the hell is going on? Because right now, my Twitter machine is blowing up. So I said before we even started recording, what a perfect day to record. Where do you want to begin with? What should the people be worried about right now? What the hell is going on?
Well, we've got kind of multiple threads going right now. So obviously in the last 24 to 48 hours, right before we started recording, the this is not confirmed. It is a rumor, which I don't like them reporting, but the rumor has that the grand jury in New York has voted to indict individual one, otherwise known as Donald J. Trump, in the Stormy Daniels hush money case. There's also, on top of that, a rumor that there's another payment to another Playboy model that's also currently being investigated by Alvin Bragg. So this may not be the only indictment. Um, I so that is kind of the big news story of like the last couple hours. Now, the indictment has not officially come out yet. This is only a rumor. According to the New York Times, it's according to 4 people. We don't, of course, know who these people are. It could be the janitor, his friend, sort of thing. But the secretary and the admin. So we don't know. It has not for sure come out yet, but it seems to hold that this indictment in New York is actually going to happen. Now, will that slow down him running for president? Probably not. Will it likely embolden a lot of his supporters and cause a rally around the flag situation? Yes. So this is bad news for Trump. It's probably worse news for Ron DeSantis. Now DeSantis is going to try to spin it as, hey, if you want to nominate somebody who's not getting indicted, consider DeSantis 2024. Is that argument going to work? Probably not. He isn't even the first choice for a presidential candidate in his own state of Florida. New polling came out from Pew this morning that has Trump cooking at 46% and DeSantis on his heels at 42%. So for somebody that just won re-election in his state in a landslide to not be your state's first choice as a presidential candidate tells you a lot about what your appeal is on a national level, and that's not great. The other one that has happened today is a riot at the Tennessee state capitol over a anti-trans bill that was passed, vetoed by the governor, and then overridden by the state legislature. And there is a riot, last I checked, still in progress at the Tennessee state capitol. Obviously, the other big story is Tennessee's neighbor, Kentucky, just passed a very militant anti-trans bill restricting any sort of gender-affirming care for those under 18, all this type of thing. That obviously is a bigger story this week because of what happened on Monday with the shooting at the Covenant Presbyterian Christian School. And a trans shooter going in there and shooting the place up. So this is kind of what is happening just on the domestic front this week. When we turn outward, we obviously still have the war in Ukraine. The last time I was on this podcast, because Mars and I can't always come together on scheduling because we're both very busy, and sometimes we'll be kind of like, oh, I should come on and talk about this, and then months will pass. And so
That's a fact.
yes, when I was last here talking about the war in Ukraine, it had just started. We're now a year into this conflict, and it's spring, things are warming up, which means troops can start moving around again. Ukraine was bracing for a big Russian offensive on the frontier on their border this year. That appears to have stalled due to the logistics issues that we already know the Russian army has issues with. It was anticipated that the Ukrainians would lose a town called Bakhmut, and that did not happen. So far, the Ukrainians have held on. And now, this is partly because the West continues to pour a lot of weapons and money into that conflict. At this point, we are fighting a proxy war with Russia. We are just paying the Ukrainians bucket loads to do it for us. Because it's cheaper than schlepping our military over there. And so that's kind of where we're at the current time. The general consensus right now is that this conflict is probably going to drag on for some time. Putin's not going to give up that easy. One of the things the Russians are doing right now is they are lobbing a lot of missiles into Ukraine, especially Kyiv, and striking um landmarks. This is a familiar strategy he did it in Chechnya in the early 2000s. Basically, how they won Chechnya is they bombed them into the Stone Age. Literally, they destroyed every single thing. If it had four walls and was standing, they bombed it. And that's basically what they're now trying to do in Ukraine. Now, Chechnya is about the size of New Jersey. Ukraine is about the size of Texas, so it's a much
quite different.
Yeah. There's a lot more buildings to bomb, but that's not stopping the Russians from employing this time-tested strategy of let's just start indiscriminately bombing everything. That war is probably going to keep on going for quite some time. We were looking at possibly having an energy crisis and a food crisis over the last year. The food crisis did not materialize for most of the West. It has materialized somewhat in the developed world because Ukraine and Russia together are about a quarter of the world's wheat supply. Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, has been that way since the Middle Ages. It is some of the most fertile arable land on the planet. It is as good as the Midwest, if not better. And so they're also a top provider of fertilizer, which is pretty much all of world agriculture is dependent on. Having that off the market has had to cause other companies, other countries, other places to kind of step in to pick up the slack. But fortunately for us, that's actually happened. Wheat prices didn't skyrocket. This is great news if you're a farmer in Kansas. You're going to do great this year. You probably sold your winter wheat at a great commodity price. So that, good for the farmers in Kansas. And that is happened. As far as the energy crisis goes, that's still not resolved. Europe got exceptionally lucky in this winter. What was supposed to be an energy crisis and high natural gas prices turned out not to be the situation because Europe didn't really have winter. It didn't get that cold. They struck it lucky with a very mild winter, which is fortunate because it buys us time to finish our liquid natural gas terminals in Louisiana to start shipping natural gas to Europe by boat. That basically has now given us all of the winter, which means they didn't use up all their stores that they had already filled up on last summer. And it gives us now most of 2023 to get those terminals online, which they should be online this fall, and then start moving gas in that direction. Common misconception that people have with when we talk about oil in the Middle East and all this type of thing, America is actually a net exporter of energy. That's been true since the Obama years. That was one of the things they did with fracking. Is fracking basically was us getting our energy independence back from the Middle East. And so we've been a net exporter of energy for about 10 years now. And that is basically going to allow us to get Europe off of Russian gas. Now, if as far as a supply chain situation goes, it's going to take some time to get that perfected and stable. It's going to be more complicated than transporting it by pipeline because you have to load it into the ship has to sail to the port, as to be offloaded from the ship. Not as elegant as a pipeline that just sends it to where it needs to go. But that supply chain system is still going to be in place and should allow Europe to continue to survive. Literally, this is also good for agriculture because it's going to allow other countries to take up the slack in making fertilizer, a lot of which comes from natural gas. So that's also going to be a positive thing as well. So that's kind of the multiple threads going on right now. That's kind of, the world as we know it. Obviously, right now we have a problem with Russia over Ukraine and that whole situation. We also have a problem with China. The great decoupling between the eagle and the dragon is now very much in place. Relations between Washington and Beijing have not probably been this frosty since before Nixon went to China. Um, and also Russia and China, no surprise there, are getting a lot more cozy. Which honestly should surprise no one because China has very poor soil for agriculture. They're heavily reliant on fertilizer because their land is terrible. And that's always been that way. That's not new.
Right.
China's land for agriculture has always been crap. Um, and uh and also China has no oil in its borders. So they have bad land for agriculture. They're reliant on fertilizer. They also have no oil. They have to buy it from somewhere.
Right.
Russia has both of those things in spades. Russia has much better agricultural land in the east and the south. So do the former Soviet stands in Central Europe, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, all those places, much better agricultural land. And Russia also has tons of natural resources, both rare earths, oil, you name it, Russia has it somewhere in their country. Russia's huge.
Right.
So, um, it's no surprise that if China is kind of decoupling from the West, it's going to go to its near neighbor. It also makes supply chains a lot easier because they can put in pipelines, all this type of thing. And a lot of that stuff already exists because of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is to build a continuous development, trade, manufacturing system between Beijing and terminating in Turkey with a short kind of branch off to Moscow. So the fact that they could bring in from Russia those pipelines and that infrastructure down to what they've already built with the Belt and Road Initiative, that has the potential to cement the partnership between Russia and China. However, we're also talking about two autocratic regimes that both twist on the personality of two men. Xi Jinping has gotten more power than Mao ever had. He's gotten rid of more rivals than Mao ever did. At China's 5-year party congress in October, Xi Jinping literally had his predecessor Hu Jintao arrested on the floor in front of everybody at the end of the meeting and had him escorted from the building. That's unheard of in Chinese politics. Hu Jintao is an icon. There's a sense Mao, there have only been 6 people to lead China, and Hu Jintao is one of them. He's one of the 3 that are still alive. Hu Jintao is one of them. And so for him to be escorted from the building at the 5-year party congress in front of everybody, the American example, I suppose, would be arresting the vice president during the State of the Union, like that sort of show sort of thing. It's a huge coup in Chinese politics. And that was, not only has Xi Jinping been voted to get the title of great leader, which has only been had by Mao before in the communist system. Not only that, but he also has cemented power around him so much so he's the only person that really makes decisions in their government. Now, Putin has done something similar by getting rid of nearly all of his rivals, either by death or imprisonment. The fastest way to get dead in Russia is to try to rival Putin. He will get rid of you quickly. So the relations between those two countries, there's not a bevy of staff and other people to kind of make this relationship work. It's really Putin and Xi getting together and deciding what they are and are not going to do. I think Xi Jinping, and rightly so, is a bit suspicious of Russia. The Chinese obviously are not happy about Russia starting a war in Ukraine. They've announced some sort of peace plan that they think the Russians can they can get Russia to agree to. And mostly I think the Chinese are unhappy because it's bad for business. So in some ways, internationally, all of these things are sort of linked together. Like, so the China and the US are separating, so China's getting closer to Russia, but China wants Russia to stop its war in Ukraine because that's bad for business there. So it's kind of all linked together. And as I've been telling people, and as other people have said on Twitter, the reality is we're living in an interesting part of history. Um, I was on a podcast last night that is usually about mindfulness and mental health and all this type of thing. And I told people, I said, the news is going to be really hard right now. We are living in perilous times. So do small things to help yourself because you're going to need it. Because none of these problems are going away or resolving themselves anytime soon. Not a one. So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's kind of a broad, that was a lot of information, but that's kind of a broad overview of kind of what the world is going on right now. Obviously, back on the domestic side, we're getting ready for another presidential um
Election.
campaign
Yeah.
next year at another election, and which should be interesting. The midterms were not the blowout the Republicans hoped for. Um, and some of their candidates in their safe seats had trouble winning. Like Lauren Boebert represents West Slope, Colorado, hasn't voted for a Democrat in decades. She won by 400 votes. So that's not encouraging. Um, DeSantis was one of the few people that had a good night in 2022. Most everybody else was biting their nails forever and ever. And they still didn't get rid of Raphael Warnock in Georgia. Um, so with the whole Herschel Walker mess and all this type of thing. So 24 should be rather interesting. And the Democratic Party has changed its primary map, moving its first primary from Iowa to South Carolina, which means that will completely change the game in terms of what candidates are viable. You're also going to have a much more diverse electorate in the first primary, which probably will give some candidates some viability that others wouldn't have gotten by going through Iowa and New Hampshire first. Um, New Hampshire is a little bit unhappy about this change in schedule because their state constitution demands that they be the first primary in the nation. And it's New England, it's weird, they're weird. Um, and so that is, changing things around as well. But that's kind of the view of the world right now. That's kind of where we're at and the stories that we're following and all this type of thing. So questions, comments, concerns?
Absolutely. And I mean, thank you so much. When I tell you guys, this guy's like a walking almanac of just amazing information. Some things like I didn't even know about New Hampshire, and I consider myself pretty well versed in the political spectrum, but that is some interesting news. So, what can the ordinary Joe? You mentioned that these wars, these conflicts aren't going anywhere. We all remember, if you're 80s or 90s babies, you may remember the Cold War, and it seems like it's ramping up for Cold War II. What do
Yeah,
we know? The food crisis, the energy crisis. We know about this potential World War III that's been hovering. Last time we spoke, it seems 14 months
yeah,
later, and we're still thinking like World War III.
I
What
know.
what do we have for the ordinary Joe? If you're a farmer in Iowa or you're just a taxi driver in New York, what would you prepare? What would you suggest? You mentioned making sure you have something for mindfulness. What can you suggest that these people prepare to make sure that they're able to weather this storm that doesn't appear to be going away anytime soon, maybe even in our lifetime?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously some practical things that you can do. For example, from a life logistics perspective, make sure you know where all your important documents are, put them in one location in a fire safe box that you can grab and go. I live on the west coast of the US. You guys in the east have 35 minutes before the ICBM hits you. We have 17. So we because it's much shorter distance from
Right.
Russia to the west coast than it is to the east. And so I have basics in a fireproof safe that I can grab and go. There were moments in 2022 when I literally had it by the door, fully anticipating, the alert might come, and we might need to, leave, get to a car before the fallout happens, all this type of thing. um have an emergency meetup spot with friends and family with your community. I My family lives far. They are down in Colorado. However, our family still owns a little tiny house in a super small town. And so we've kind of all agreed to meet there because we all know where it is and we all know how to get there. Um, I have friends here. We have an agreed upon meeting spot. Go there. If you don't see me after 2 or 3 weeks, move on. Um, sort of thing. So have a kind of an exit strategy. If you live in a big city like New York City, it's going to be really hard to get out in event of an emergency. So that's something where you're going to want to, try to rely on your community to either, find ways out or find ways to survive where you're at, which may, in many cases, depending on where in the city you live, might be your best option. But having those thoughts, figuring out what that might look like, is a great thing. I know right now with inflation, we haven't even gotten into economics, but
Right.
with inflation right now is a bitch. But if you have the ability to put away $400 or $500 in cash with those documents in that lockbox, try to do it. Not to do it all at once. Put in $5, put in $10, sort of thing. But like
Right.
if you can kind of stash a little bit of cash away, that's gonna help you a lot, because in the event of conflict, power systems may stop working, financial systems may stop working. Anybody that has cash is going to have something that they can interact with other people, economically speaking. So having a little bit of cash, in with those documents that you can kind of grab and go with, is going to be an important thing. If you can afford to keep some extra food in the house, especially your non-perishables, some bottled water, all that type of thing, those are good to keep around. And by the way, a lot of this stuff, regardless of war, is good things. If you live in the South, hurricanes, like, come on, folks. Like, we know
Annually.
how to do. Yes, like we have this every year. The Midwest, we have tornado. Here in the Pacific Northwest, we have earthquakes. Like, this shouldn't be like every region of the country. California, earthquakes, fires. Like, this is stuff we
Mudslides.
yes, mudslides, yes, floods. Like, this is stuff that we should be doing anyway, as just part of our emergency things, because life sometimes happens and not in a fun way. So, but those are also handy things to do in the event of kind of a greater international conflict. As far as like activism goes and all this type of thing, there is a big problem we have right now in Congress. I'll get to it in a moment, because I was talking about it on another podcast last night, that I need everyone to, call on. We'll get to that in a minute. But as far as activism goes, when it comes to a lot of this stuff, if you have 5-10 minutes to reach out to your state assembly person, to your congressperson, all this type of thing, on an issue that you're passionate and care about, do so. One of the biggest problems in this country is political apathy. And
Mm.
if there's one thing I could do to kind of wave a magic wand and get people, to change, would be political apathy. And especially in communities of color, we're kind of the electoral dog that, barks but never really bites. And if we are willing to hit the streets less and burn shit down, and hit the system more and harder with making our names and our faces known by elected officials, we can really leverage a lot of power and galvanize a lot of support for stuff. So I would say do your basic emergency preparedness, which again, if you live in most regions of this country, you're probably going to need anyway. And then also, try to get active in your community any way that you can, that kind of fits with your schedule and all this type of thing. Those are probably the two biggest things that you can do right now.
Absolutely. And I keep this with me. I don't know if it's going to show because we have a background, but I have a bug out bag. These are available on Amazon. It's not going to show, but it's a disaster prepared kit. It has flashlights, water, food,
Yes.
sustenance. I keep it right in the studio because if those alarms go off, I'm going to be able to at least survive for a little bit. So if you haven't seen Walking Dead and all these survival shows that have been on for the last 15 years and you aren't prepared yet, you might want to get
Yeah.
on it.
Well, and that's something where the preparedness movement has been something. I grew up with it in the right, in evangelical circles, and it's already kind of been a big thing in the right. It really should be a bigger thing on the left as well, because again,
Okay.
natural disasters happen, power systems fail. Look at what happened to Texas 2 years ago. It got too cold there, so you didn't have power for a week. All this type of thing. This is just good stuff to have. So that, that would be definitely a vital a vital thing. But the big thing that I would love everybody to take 10 minutes and call their congressperson for is this new Restrict Act, otherwise known as the TikTok ban bill.
Yes.
This piece of legislation, which is being generous, it is the biggest attack on the First Amendment probably since World War II, when we restricted what people could say about the war effort and conscious objectors and dissidents and all this type of thing. It gives the government power to, without warrant and without congressional oversight, read, analyze, spy on electronic devices of every description anywhere in the country. And I'm talking smart fridges, Ring cameras, home security cameras, your phone, all this type of thing. That gives the government power to do that. It also requires the president to appoint a quote unquote secretary of communication, whose job it is to form a working group in order to decide what information should and should not be censored based upon the quote unquote national interest. Now, here's the problem. National interest is not defined, which means anybody in power can decide what is in the national interest. And as I was saying on the podcast I did yesterday, in the Black community, we already know what this is like. There are too many incidences of the government coming in, infiltrating organizations, outright spying on revolutionary groups, all this type of thing. And there's, the MOVE bombings in Philadelphia in the 70s, which, Assata Shakur, Tupac's mother, literally had to argue in court to get off from. She was literally pregnant with him when she was arguing that case in court. All this type of thing. The way the Black Panthers were infiltrated, I had a chance to hang out with Elaine Brown when I was in college 10 years ago. All this type of thing. This stuff is legendary in communities of color. We know how this works. They're taking every dirty trick that they've used on communities of color for the last 50, 60 years, and they're making it legal and making it for everyone. So if you do not want some bureaucrat in Virginia at the NSA to be reading your hot Instagram DMs with so-and-so or whatever have you, then this is a piece of legislation that we simply cannot allow them to pass, because basically anything can be censored at any time. Anyone can be arrested for saying something at any time, which for those of us that work in media, we're on the front lines because we'll be the first to go. And I even tell people that even if you're not into news and politics, if you want TMZ to continue to exist, the Shade Room to continue to exist, the whole network of YouTubers that do entertainment news about housewives and all this type of thing, no, I'm not saying that this is the agenda, but under this legislation, the government could shut all of that down for the national interest tomorrow, and this law would not only would allow them to do it, but would have no oversight and no standard. Absolutely. So when it comes to the Restrict Act, I tell people, if you have 10 minutes in the carpool, in your carpool, if you have 10 minutes at the pickup line where you're getting your kids, if you have 20 minutes during a soccer practice, don't tweet, don't email, get on the phone, pick up because that's what Congress critters care about in Washington. Pick up the phone, call your congressperson. If you don't know who they are, go to YouGov.com and you can find your congressperson and pick up the phone, call, mention, Restrict Act, you're a constituent and you're against it. That's all you have to say. And then you can say thank you and goodbye. But that's literally, like, right now, the only way we're going to make this untenable for them to vote for is if they're getting 50, 60 calls a day or more from angry constituents saying, I don't want this Restrict Act. Now, when it comes to banning TikTok, we can have a discussion about whether the most popular app in America should be owned by a Chinese company and where that data is going with the government and all this type of thing. I don't know that banning it as such is useful or productive, but they're billing it as, oh, we're just banning TikTok. But the reality is it's so much more. They can put you in prison 20 years, fine of $250,000 for using a VPN that contacts any quote unquote adversary that they don't like. And it's not just foreign adversary, it's adversary. I actually read the law of the proposed legislation, rather. Any adversary, which means and this has already happened in communities of color. This conversation right now could be classified as that. And as I was saying last night, I'm like, and now we're talking federal time. Okay, you're
Right.
not at San Quentin, you're not at no Attica, you're not at no Rikers. No. You're at like Leavenworth. Like you're at one of these, you're in Montrose, you're at one of these big nasty federal affairs. Like this is federal time, folks. So this is just they're in no civilized country can this sort of thing be allowed where the government gets to decide what information is or is not in the national interest. And as I tell people, please call your congressman. And guess what? If you're a felon and can't vote, no worries, bruh, because you don't need to be able to vote to call your congressman to complain. So you a felon, you done time, you can't vote, not a problem. Pick up the phone and complain anyway, because you can still complain about this legislation regardless of your past criminal status. So go ahead and take the time and go out there and complain. If there's, and this is something where if you value being able to say what you want to say, write what you want to write, watch what you want to watch in this country moving forward, and you don't think the government should be determining that, please, please, please call your House rep right now. YouGov.com, find your congressperson, call them and let them know the Restrict Act is no good, because that is, and you're against it, because if this goes through, we will not have, that will be the end of free speech in this country, effectively.
Absolutely. And this is something that hits home personally as a member of the media. That's my livelihood. There's no more
Same.
D.E.N. There's no more Cameron Journal. There's no more
Yep.
Politicking as usual. There's no more Joe Rogan. There's no more any of the podcasts you listen to. They're under fire. Any of the TMZ, as you mentioned. I know you love your news, America. I know you love your news about your celebrities. It ain't gonna be there. So please, it's not TikTok. It's not just TikTok. We've heard it
Yep.
as the TikTok law. That's a mask thing. So I don't even use TikTok. No, you use something that can be restricted. So Cam, thank you so much. We'll put all of that information on the screen as well as the link. I need you guys to do this. If you love me, and I know you do, I need you to pick up your phone. I need you to call your local and let them know I'm a constituent. Restrict that. I'm not about it. You need to do that immediately, because if you don't think it can happen, it's already happened. Look at
Yeah,
the
no,
Hampton story. It's already happened
yes.
here. So please.
Yes, and there's a history about this already, in terms of, we found out from Matt Taibbi in the Twitter files, with government being too close to social media for promoting and restricting certain stories. That's all not okay. So to some degree, it's already here.
Right.
This codifies it into law and gives broad executive powers. I mean, imagine Trump with the power to decide that anything said against him is against the national interest and must be banned.
If you don't think
That
he would have
would
done
wipe
that.
out, yes, that would wipe out 60% of media in this country. You would be left with Fox News. And that it would be Fox News, OAN, and Newsmax, and they would be the only games in town. The rest of us who were complaining about him would have either had to change our coverage, withdraw stuff, or simply quit existing.
Absolutely.
And even in the case of a Democratic president, should not be able to shut down Fox News, OAN, and Newsmax. That's not a democracy by any stretch of the imagination. And so it is vitally important that we make our voices heard. And as I tell people, here's how political activism works. If we can get 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 calls a day into every congressperson, there's a lot of more moderate Democrats and Republicans who are going to start to want to not vote for this. Yeah. And you need 215 votes to get it passed. All we need is to peel off 10, 20, 30, because it's going to be a party line vote, peel off 10, 20, 30, and all of a sudden they don't have the votes to get it past the floor. And if we're really on it, they might not have the votes to get it out of committee. So that would be, even better, so that they have to at least modify it, or hopefully it will just die, because the reality is the government is the last institution that should be determining who gets to say what. It's too much power for anybody to have.
And that's a soundbite. That is a soundbite, and it's so very true. Cam, we didn't even get into economics, which means I got to invite you back because you always
Yes.
are the gift that keeps on giving.
Oh,
Before we go,
yes, no, that's a whole thing. Inflation, and yes, it's that. Yes, that we'll have to come back and chat about that.
as a man who rarely leaves the house and orders a lot of DoorDash and a lot of Instacart, it's actually cheaper for me to order DoorDash than to order groceries as just a single guy. So it's
I know.
crazy out here. It's crazy out.
I'm in the same boat. Like I just had two breakfast burritos for lunch, and I was calculating the cost of being like ordering both of these was $22, and they were brought to my door. To buy all the ingredients to make that would cost way more.
Way
Like
more.
it's yeah, it's insane right now, but we can come on again and talk about what the hell is going on with the economy.
We most definitely will. We most definitely will. Please give the PAU fans one more time your social media, where they can find you. And if you want to say hello to anyone, of course you can do that as
Yeah.
well.
No, thank you guys all for listening, and thank you guys all for picking up the phone and getting your voices heard on the Restrict Act. Do you catch me on Twitter? It's at Cameron Cowan. Same thing on Instagram, facebook.com/Cameron L. Cowan. And if you don't want to be bothered to look all that stuff up yourself, head over to CameronJournal.com. All of my social links are at the top, and I'm also on TikTok as well under the Cameron Journal. So but those are all on the website. And if you want to listen to the podcast, head over to CameronJournal.com/podcast, select your favorite service, and there are buttons there that will take you right there, and you can listen to the weekly news hour from Monday and this week's book interview. So, and thank you for having me on again. I appreciate it.
Always welcome, brother. I know we take forever, but when we get together, it's fireworks. So I love it. I love it.
Yep.
Guys,
Yep.
thank you so much for tuning in to Politicking as usual. It's your place to go where you can get the political spectrum from A to Z. We thank Cameron for the plethora of information. If you take anything away, call your local representative. Let's get this restricted. That's what I like to hear. So, guys,
Yep.
as always, we thank you so much for tuning in. It's Mars. That's Cam. Thank you for looking at politicking as usual. Later, guys. All right. And that is where, oh, there we go.